Judged by his colleagues for always being late and never thinking about himself, the driver gave up his only meal to feed an abandoned puppy that was trembling with hunger. But when they witnessed what the animal did next, the entire group froze in disbelief, and everyone's heart began to race. Lucas had worked countless late-night shifts for the small delivery company in Caraway Springs, a quiet town where the hum of street lamps and the echo of distant cars were his only companions. On that brisk evening, he had loaded his battered motorcycle with 2 plastic bags of takeout, both marked for urgent delivery, and ridden off into the chilly darkness. Though the town itself seemed asleep, the air glimmered with a promise of change he could not yet perceive. For a man who spent each day hoping for a break that never came, Lucas had grown used to disappointment. But he also nurtured an unspoken dream that perhaps, one day, fate would finally show him a little kindness. As he navigated the empty streets, he tried to shake off the fatigue weighing on his shoulders. His phone buzzed with a final order, an address at the outskirts of Caraway Springs near the old industrial park, where a few buildings still flickered with dim security lights. That area was known for stray animals, wandering among rusted fences and heaps of abandoned scrap metal. Lucas pulled to a stop beneath a flickering street lamp to check the exact location. He sighed, glancing at the time on his phone. It was almost midnight, and the rumble in his stomach reminded him that he had not eaten since the morning. He took the last meal he had prepared for himself, a modest sandwich wrapped in foil, and tucked it away, determined to deliver his remaining orders first. After all, the only thing he could control in life was his commitment to the job. Rain threatened, the sky heavy with low-hanging clouds. Lucas revved the old motorcycle engine and headed toward the industrial outskirts, expecting quiet roads and little more than wet pavement. Yet as he approached the final stretch of the delivery route, he caught sight of something that made him slow down. Near a pile of overturned crates, barely visible in the scant moonlight, lay a thin shape huddled against a broken fence. A dog, drenched by the drizzle that had just begun, stared at him. Its eyes shone with a silent plea, a reflection of the same hunger he felt in his own stomach. Lucas braked abruptly. The dog seemed ready to bolt, but remained where it was, trembling, perhaps too weak to stand. He removed his helmet and dismounted, heart racing as the drizzle transformed into a cold patter against his jacket. Working as a delivery driver for so long taught him to be wary of stray animals. Some could be aggressive, especially when fearful. But something about the dog's posture, the quiet resignation in its eyes, pulled him closer. He knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through his jeans, and slowly extended his hand. The dog lowered its muzzle, whimpering softly. Its fur was matted with mud, and a gash on its hind leg glistened under the faint reflection of the street lamp. Without thinking twice, Lucas reached into the insulated box strapped to his bike. His last personal meal was in there, half crushed yet still edible. He remembered it vividly. He had counted on that sandwich to keep him going until sunrise. He hesitated for only a moment, then unwrapped the foil. The dog's nose twitched at the smell of food, and for the first time all night, Lucas felt his own hunger recede behind a far more urgent empathy. He tore off a piece of the sandwich and offered it in his outstretched palm. The dog eyed it warily at first, then, with a tentative step, began to eat. Lucas could feel the gentle brush of the stray's whiskers against his hand, a strange moment of trust forged in the hush of near-midnight emptiness. When the dog had finished, Lucas looked at what was left of his sandwich, almost nothing. His stomach growled, but he simply exhaled. "You need this more than I do, buddy," he said gently, placing the rest of the food on the ground. The dog devoured every last scrap as if it were a banquet. Then it lifted its gaze, those quiet eyes expressing a gratitude so profound that Lucas felt his chest tighten. He patted the animal's head, concerned about the wound on its hind leg. The dog flinched but did not pull away. After rummaging in his small backpack, Lucas found an old bandana, damp but clean enough to wrap around the injury. With delicate care, he tied it, ignoring the drizzle soaking his jacket. He realized he could not linger long. The delivery was still waiting, and his boss would be furious if he took too long. Rising carefully, he glanced at the dog, which now managed to stand on shaky legs. "I'll be back," Lucas promised, though he had no idea if he truly could or would. The dog stayed by the broken fence, tail wagging faintly, as though it half believed he would return. Something in that gesture broke Lucas's heart, but he turned, mounted his bike, and hurried off into the darkness. 10 minutes later, Lucas arrived at the client's address, a mold-stained apartment block, faintly lit by a fluorescent bulb in the courtyard. After pressing the buzzer several times, he delivered the takeout to a bleary-eyed man who paid in crumpled bills. The tip was meager, but at least it was something. With that done, Lucas planned to head home. Yet the memory of those anxious eyes near the industrial park haunted him. He thought about the dog's tremor, the look that spoke of desperation, and an odd flicker of hope. A sudden pang of conscience flared in him. How often had he hoped for a break, for someone to reach out a hand and lift him from the daily grind? Too many times to count. Rain intensified, and each drop struck his helmet with a hollow echo. He hesitated at the intersection. If he turned left, he could be home in 20 minutes, warming himself under his frayed blanket, ignoring the ache in his stomach. If he turned right, he'd head back to that industrial zone where the stray might still be clinging to survival. The choice felt heavier than logic would suggest. With a firm twist of the handlebars, he turned right. Something in him insisted that he needed to check on the dog, to ensure it was not left to die in the cold. By the time Lucas returned to the broken fence, the drizzle had given way to a steady downpour. He parked the bike beneath an abandoned awning and hurried through puddles. His shoes were soaked through in seconds, and the chill cut through his thin jacket. At first he saw nothing, just crates, metal scraps, and the flicker of lightning revealing dark silhouettes in the distance. Then a quiet whimper reached his ears. The stray was still there, pressed against the same fence, trembling with renewed shivers. Though the bandana around its leg remained in place, it was now thoroughly soaked. "You're still here," Lucas murmured, his voice almost lost in the roar of the rain. The dog, recognizing him, tried to stand, but its legs faltered. It was clear the animal was weaker than before. Something in that sight tugged at Lucas's core. He had no illusions about his own situation, barely making rent, skipping meals to pay bills, but even so, he couldn't turn away. He crouched down and scooped the dog into his arms, ignoring the muddy water soaking his clothes. The animal let out a small yelp, but then relaxed, as if realizing this human meant no harm. Its body felt alarmingly light, ribs protruding under ragged fur. "I can't leave you here," Lucas whispered. His breath came in visible puffs as the night's chill bore down on them. "Come on, we'll figure something out." Carrying the dog back to his motorcycle was a challenge. Balancing the trembling creature in one arm while steering was nearly impossible. He finally managed to settle the dog in front of him, shielded by his jacket. He turned on the engine, which sputtered in complaint before roaring to life. The rain was relentless, slashing across his visor, but he pressed on, determined to find shelter. Lucas's one-room apartment was part of a rundown building with peeling paint and a flickering hallway light. The landlady frowned upon pets and threatened eviction if tenants broke her rules. But in that moment, as he carried the wounded animal up 2 flights of rickety stairs, he decided the risk was worth it. He couldn't abandon the dog outside. When he finally managed to get the door open, he set the dog gently on a tattered rug near his narrow bed. Water pooled around them both. He was shivering, the dog was worse, and every inch of the tiny apartment smelled of damp cloth. "Sorry it's not fancy," Lucas mumbled, searching for a clean towel in a sparse closet. He found an old blanket that had seen better days and carefully wrapped the dog. Its eyes fluttered, fatigue overwhelming it. He then checked the leg wound. The bandana was soaked, but the bleeding appeared to have stopped. A wave of relief washed through him. With the dog at last settled, Lucas eased onto his bed, back aching, mind racing. He pulled out his phone to check his bank balance. As expected, the numbers were discouraging. Still, he resolved to find a way to get the dog proper care. Maybe tomorrow, he could persuade a small neighborhood vet to let him pay in installments. His half-eaten sandwich, the one he'd given away, drifted through his mind. Although he was starving, the memory gave him an unexpected warmth. In the quiet gloom of his meager home, the dog's soft breathing felt like an anchor to something bigger than his day-to-day survival. Everything in his life had been about scraping by. Perhaps he was not the only one who needed a chance. Lightning flashed through the thin curtains, and thunder rumbled across the sky. The dog stirred but did not wake. By the flickering glow of the hallway light seeping under his apartment door, Lucas studied the animal's muddy fur and lean form. He couldn't guess the breed, some mix of who knew what. But there was a trace of dignity in its gentle features. "I offered you my last meal," Lucas said quietly, "but I think you've given me something even bigger. Hope." He lay back, eyes drifting shut. Outside, the storm raged, but in that cramped room, something peaceful was unfolding. One humble delivery driver, one wounded stray dog, both struggling at the margins of a world that barely noticed them. And yet, in the darkest hours of a stormy night, they had found each other. Whatever would come next, Lucas sensed his life might never be the same again. In the pale morning light that slipped through the cracks in Lucas's threadbare curtains, the dog's ears twitched as it slowly awoke. Lucas sprawled atop his narrow bed, opened his eyes to see the animal blinking in confusion. They exchanged a silent moment of mutual surprise before the dog turned its head away. Its wound remained wrapped in the damp bandana, and a fresh wave of guilt swept through Lucas as he remembered he had no money to take it to a proper vet. The entire apartment smelled faintly of wet fur and stale air, a reminder that both man and dog were starting the day in far from ideal conditions. Yet there was something undeniably comforting in the presence of another living being in that cramped space. Lucas sat up, rubbing the exhaustion from his face. The dog flinched, uncertain about his movement. "Easy," he murmured, trying to keep his voice gentle. He dragged himself off the bed to fill a small bowl with the trickle of water from his kitchen tap. Then he paused, realizing he had no dog food, no leftovers, nothing. Clutching the bowl, he walked back and placed it near the makeshift blanket the dog lay upon. The animal eyed him, its ribs pressing starkly against skin and fur. "I'll figure out something," Lucas promised, not quite sure how. He was as hungry as the dog, but at least he could function on an empty stomach. The dog needed nourishment just to stand without trembling. Before he could decide what to do, a sharp rap on his front door shattered the tentative calm. He hurried to open it, heart pounding at the thought that maybe, somehow, his boss had found out he was harboring a stray. Instead, he was met with the stern face of his landlady, Donna Marta, who crossed her arms with unmistakable disapproval. "I've received complaints," she began curtly, craning her neck to peer inside the room. "Neighbors said they heard whining last night. Animals are not allowed here, Lucas." He felt his stomach twist and his mind raced for an excuse. Behind him, the dog let out a faint whimper, as if sensing the tension. "Donna Marta, it's not permanent. I found this dog in terrible shape. It was raining so hard, His words rushed out in a jumbled plea. The landlady's stern expression softened marginally, but her tone remained resolute. "You're a good boy, Lucas, but the rules are the rules. If you want to keep that dog here, it'll have to be gone by tonight." Otherwise, you'll need to find yourself a new place." She glanced at the bandana on the dog's leg, her brows knitting momentarily in concern, but duty outweighed sympathy. "I'll give you this one day," she said, voice firm, then turned on her heel and marched back down the hall. Lucas closed the door slowly, forehead pressed against the peeling wood as he shut his eyes. He had nowhere to take the dog. The town's small shelter was perpetually full, and the local rescue groups ran on donations that barely kept them afloat. Besides, a dog with an injury would demand medical attention fast. "Well, guess we're really in it now," he muttered, forcing a smile he did not feel. The dog stared, looking uncomprehending but oddly calm. Its posture said, "I've known worse." Lucas exhaled, grabbed his phone, and started typing a message to a friend who worked part-time at a small veterinary clinic across town. Maybe Dr. Hannah could help, even if it meant paying off the bill in small installments over many months. Although it was his day off, Lucas left the apartment with the dog wrapped in the old blanket, carefully carrying it down the creaking stairs. The drizzle from the night before had vanished, replaced by a brisk morning wind. He hoisted the animal onto the back seat of his battered motorcycle and secured it with a rope he normally used to tie deliveries. The dog let out a nervous whine but did not fight him. Lucas patted its head reassuringly. "Let's get you taken care of." They rode through narrow streets lined with modest homes, some in better shape than others, laundry flapping in the early breeze. Caraway Springs was a place of measured routines, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. As Lucas passed, a few neighbors peered from windows, whispering among themselves. He tried not to think about any judgments they might cast. A bigger concern weighed on him. The clinic's fees would be beyond his means. His only hope was that Dr. Hannah might take pity on the situation. When he pulled up to the clinic, a simple one-story building with a chipped sign that read Green Oaks Veterinary Care, Lucas felt his heart lurch. A wave of memories assailed him. The last time he had been here, he was a teenager, desperately trying to save the family cat after it swallowed a piece of plastic. The cat hadn't survived, and that final loss had taught him how fragile hope could be. Now, stepping off the motorcycle, he forced himself to breathe evenly. No matter how faint, hope was all he had. Inside, the faint smell of disinfectant and an old heater permeated the cramped waiting area. Mismatched plastic chairs lined the walls, and a small reception desk stood at the far end. Dr. Hannah's assistant, a middle-aged woman with a friendly face, looked up from some paperwork. Her expression turned concerned the instant she saw Lucas carrying the trembling stray. "Oh dear, that looks serious. Is that dog yours?" He braced himself. "Not exactly. I found him last night. He's injured, hungry. I know you all are busy, but is Dr. Hannah around?" She nodded and vanished through a door labeled exam room. Moments later, Dr. Hannah emerged, rolling up the sleeves of her white coat. With short hair and sharp eyes, she radiated a calm competence that allowed Lucas a fleeting surge of relief. "Lucas," she greeted, remembering him from years past, "come with me. Let's get this dog onto the exam table." Following her into the small room, Lucas gently set the dog down. The bright overhead light made every wound and bruise starkly visible, and Dr. Hannah frowned at the pitiful sight. "He's severely underweight. The bandana helped stop bleeding, which is good, but this cut might already be infected." She began her examination, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. The dog whimpered but offered no resistance beyond trembling legs. "You did a good job stabilizing him," Dr. Hannah told Lucas. "His vitals are weak but treatable." Relief washed over him. I don't have much money. If there's a payment plan, maybe." He stumbled awkwardly over his words, fear and gratitude mingling in his voice. To his surprise, Dr. Hannah offered a sympathetic smile. "We can work something out, especially if you decide to keep him." I'd rather see this animal treated than turn you away. Keep him." The phrase echoed in Lucas's thoughts, both a promise and a threat. He remembered the landlady's ultimatum, the precarious budget that barely covered his modest life. Yet when he looked down and saw the dog gazing back with quiet patience, he felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. Maybe a part of him already considered the stray his. Over the next half hour, Dr. Hannah and her assistant administered vaccines and removed bits of gravel from the gash, finally bandaging it more thoroughly. She prescribed antibiotics for infection and offered Lucas a bag of sample dog food, enough to get through a few days. By the time they finished, the dog was drowsy from the sedation, but stable. While Dr. Hannah wrote notes in the file, Lucas placed a hesitant hand on the dog's head. The animal stirred slightly, as if acknowledging the gentle touch. When Lucas thanked Dr. Hannah repeatedly, her look turned serious. "No need for that. Just promise me you'll think carefully about his future. A dog's not just for tonight or tomorrow. This is years of commitment. If you can't manage, I understand, but find him a safe place." He nodded, aware that everything, his finances, his living situation, was dangerously fragile. Yet in that moment, leaving the dog behind felt unthinkable. With the clinic visit finished, Lucas quietly settled his small debt for the medication and care. It barely fit on his credit card, and his stomach twisted, knowing he had no clue how he would pay next month's rent. But he pushed the worry aside. For the first time since he could remember, he felt he was doing something truly right, even if it made no sense on paper. Outside, the sun had finally broken free from the morning clouds, drenching the street in a warm glow. Lucas carried the dog back to his bike, pausing to give it a taste of the kibble Dr. Hannah had provided. Though still woozy, it ate with quiet eagerness. "We have to face Dona Marta," Lucas said, half to himself, half to the dog. The day stretched ahead like a gauntlet of impossible tasks, finding a place for the dog, continuing deliveries, scraping money together to pay for everything. Yet as he sped through the mid-morning traffic, the dog resting in a sling of blankets strapped to the bike, Lucas felt a spark of determination. He had spent so long craving a single shred of good fortune. Maybe, in a small way, this dog was that good fortune, even if it meant more challenges. Could destiny sometimes come disguised as one more responsibility? He didn't have time for philosophical musings. Approaching his building, he spotted Dona Marta sweeping the front stoop, her sharp eyes scanning for trouble. Lucas's chest tightened, but before he could speak, she raised a hand. "You and I need to talk, Lucas," she declared, her tone neither harsh nor kind. He parked the motorcycle and gathered the drowsy dog into his arms. There, in the morning sunlight, two determined souls stood facing a landlady's stern expression. "I won't have you thrown onto the streets," she continued quietly, "but you'll need to prove that this doesn't cause any more problems. If there are complaints about noise, damage, or worse, you'll be out, understood?" Lucas breathed out in relief. "Understood," he replied. Gratitude flooded him. He didn't question her sudden leniency. Perhaps she had a soft spot under that tough exterior. Either way, a reprieve was all he needed for now. He carried the dog up to his apartment. Inside, with the sunlight slipping across the scuffed floor, it felt ever so slightly more hopeful. He set down the borrowed bag of dog food and realized he still didn't even have a name for the stray. Easing the animal onto the worn rug, he sank beside it. "I guess you need a name," Lucas whispered, a quiet wonder in his voice. The dog blinked, tail wagging softly, and in that single gesture a bond seemed to be forged. Lucas rummaged through possible names, mind swirling with half-remembered childhood stories or once-favorite songs. He'd never been particularly good at naming anything, whether it was a second-hand scooter or a goldfish that survived only 2 days in a plastic bowl. Yet naming this dog felt different, like granting identity to a fellow traveler adrift in a world that had shown neither of them much kindness. He tried out a few. "Buddy, Milo, Rusty?" At each attempt, the dog cocked its head, listening, but no spark suggested any name was quite right. At length, Lucas sighed. "We'll figure it out soon, I promise," he said, standing to look for a decent bowl. He scooped a bit of the sample kibble Dr. Hannah had given him, bright pellets rattling as they fell into the dish. The cheerful photo on the bag showed glossy-coated dogs bounding across green fields, a stark contrast to the thin, mud-stained creature in his apartment. "Maybe someday you'll be that healthy," he murmured, placing the bowl within the dog's reach. He checked his phone to see that it was already past 10 in the morning, dangerously close to his noon shift. So much for his day off. He took a quick lukewarm shower, thoughts churning about what to do if Dona Marta came knocking again. He dried off and donned the navy blue uniform he'd grown to despise, 2 sizes too large and embroidered with the company's peeling logo. Meanwhile, the dog remained tucked against the wall, gaze tracking his every move. Lucas crouched and studied the bandage. It was still serviceable for now, but he would need to change it soon. "I'll come up with something," he said gently, though it sounded more like a plea than a promise. The next problem was obvious: where to leave the dog while he worked. He couldn't risk complaints from neighbors if the animal whimpered all day. There was only one person he could think of who might help. A few doors down lived Dona Estela, an elderly widow known for minding neighbors' children. Maybe she'd take pity on him. Carrying the dog carefully, still wrapped in the worn blanket, Lucas tiptoed into the hallway. The building's walls were thin, and every step felt like it could set off a cascade of suspicious eyes. A waft of cinnamon hit him the moment he reached Dona Estela's open doorway. Inside, the old woman sat in a rocker, listening to a soap opera on a tinny radio. She paused when she saw him in the hall, eyebrows lifting at the sight of the injured dog. Lucas explained the situation. He had to go to work. The dog couldn't stay alone, and he had no money to pay anyone. He expected her to shoo him away, but instead she squinted, as though assessing if he was sincere. Then she clicked her tongue and motioned him inside. "Put that poor creature down on a cushion," she said, her voice gentler than her expression. "I'll keep an eye on it for a few hours." Relief flooded him, and he set the dog on a corner mat. "I'll owe you, Dona Estela, really, thank you." She only waved off his gratitude. "I'm too old for big tasks, but I can watch him nap. Just make sure he's not sick with something contagious." Lucas left some of the sample kibble and instructions about the antibiotics. The dog blinked at him as if unsure whether this was goodbye for good. He patted its head and hurried out, his heart heavier than he expected. Down the worn stairs he went, the weight of responsibility gnawing at him. He revved up his old motorcycle and headed toward the distribution center. As always, the tiny parking lot was crowded with delivery bikes of every shape and condition, each belonging to a driver chasing tips in a town that seemed to run on takeout. Lucas parked and dashed inside, grabbing his assignments from Gyro, the boss, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a perpetual frown. "You're late," Gyro snapped, thrusting an order slip into Lucas's hand. Lucas forced an apology, not daring to mention his canine crisis. He simply started up the bike again and roared away, hours stretching ahead in a blur of deliveries. Street by street, he crisscrossed Caraway Springs, weaving past pedestrians, halting at red lights, always with one eye on the clock. Yet no matter how urgent each errand felt, half his mind remained with the dog. He wondered if it was restless, if the bandage needed changing, if the antibiotics were working. Guilt nipped at him. He was a stranger to commitments. He never owned anything precious enough to fight for, and now that he did, he wasn't sure how to handle it. By mid-afternoon, the sun hung high and oppressive. Lucas's phone buzzed with a new address, this one on the far side of town near rolling farmland. He followed the highway that curved past old warehouses and scrapyards. Memories of the previous night flickered through his mind, of the dog lying amid abandoned crates, trembling in the darkness. The way it had looked at him, as if understanding he was the only hope around. Lucas accelerated, reminding himself he had found that dog for a reason, even if the reason remained hazy. He managed to finish his deliveries just after dusk. Tips were modest, but enough that he could buy something to eat for himself after days of half-skip meals. He swung by a small grocery store and purchased a can of dog food, a cheap loaf of bread, and a packet of instant noodles for himself. Shiro wanted him to work extra hours, but Lucas declined, citing personal responsibilities. His boss only grumbled. By the time Lucas finally returned to the building, the last streaks of sunset were fading into evening's deep blue. He found Donna Estella on her balcony watering a row of potted herbs. She offered him a warm smile and beckoned him inside. The dog lay curled by her sofa, apparently dozing. "He's been quiet," she reported in a low voice, though he limped around a bit, sniffing everything. "Ate most of what you left." She lowered her gaze. "He's a sweet soul. Reminds me of the mutt I had as a girl." Lucas's expression radiated thanks. He approached the dog, which immediately lifted its head and tried to stand, wagging its tail in greeting. Something about that small gesture made his eyes prick with emotion. "I'll take him now," he murmured. "You've done more than enough." Just as he bent to pick up the dog, Donna Estella touched his arm. "Lucas, you be careful. Caring for a living thing isn't easy when you're barely getting by." Her tone was kindly, but the implication was stark. He nodded, too choked up to speak, and carried the dog toward his apartment. The stairs groaned, and the single flickering bulb in the hall cast long shadows, but for once, the gloom didn't feel as oppressive. The dog cuddled against him, trusting and warm. Inside, he placed it gently on the rug. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly, brandishing the can of dog food. The dog sniffed the air. Lucas poured the contents into a bowl, the pungent smell making him realize how hungry he was too. After giving the dog a moment, he opened the packet of noodles for himself, prepared them with tap water and a quick boil on his single hot plate. As the dog ate, muzzle deep in the bowl, Lucas watched the rhythm of its tail. "You're going to need a real checkup soon," he said, though the dog merely licked the last morsel and blinked contentedly. He felt drained, physically and emotionally. The day had been a swirl of errands and half-formed hopes, and yet a sense of purpose anchored him in a way that deliveries and tips never had. He tidied the apartment, sweeping away bits of debris and rearranging the clutter to carve out a safer spot for the dog to move around. Finally, he sank onto the bed, motioning for the dog to join him if it wanted. Hesitantly, it limped over and placed its muzzle on the mattress. Lucas smiled and gave it a scratch behind the ears. "If I have to choose a name," he said, recalling how that question had hovered all day, "I like the sound of chance. It's like a reminder, you know, that we both got a chance at something better." The dog's ear flicked, then it let out a small, content huff before resting its head. "So, chance it is," Lucas decided, heart swelling a fraction at how right it felt. Rain spattered softly on the windows through the night, but Lucas slept better than he had in ages. For once, he wasn't preoccupied with the usual anxieties that dogged him: rent, meager wages, and whether tomorrow's tips would keep him afloat. Instead, he drifted into a dreamless slumber, lulled by the gentle breathing of the stray he had rescued. Morning arrived with a faint glow creeping past the thin curtains. Chance opened his eyes as Lucas stirred, stretching carefully to avoid jostling the bandaged leg. Lucas sat up, rubbed the sleep from his eyes, and realized with a jolt that it was already 8:30. He flung his feet onto the floor, mind racing. He had to clock in by 9, and the ride to the distribution center took at least 15 minutes. but the dog needed medication first and someone to watch him through the day. Again. He chewed his lip. Could he impose on Donna Estela a second time? Would she be willing to help on a long-term basis? He knew it wouldn't be fair to keep asking her, especially without proper payment. Sighing, he fished out his phone to see if he had any messages from Dr. Hannah or potential fosters he'd contacted through a rescue forum. Nothing but automated spam. "Well, buddy," he said, crouching by Chance's side, "I guess we'll try your babysitter one more time." Thankfully, after a quick knock on her door, Donna Estela agreed to supervise Chance for another day. This time, Lucas pressed a small folded bill into her hand. She resisted at first, but he insisted. "I can't keep doing this to you without compensation, even if it's not much." She finally relented with a reluctant nod, and so began a routine that felt both frantic and tenuous. Each day, Lucas juggled deliveries and caretaker duties. He lived in fear of what might happen if Donna Estela decided she'd done enough, or if Donna Marta found a stricter reason to evict him. Yet the bond with Chance continued to grow. Bit by bit, the dog's limp improved, appetite returned, and a hint of playful curiosity emerged. One evening, after a particularly arduous shift, Lucas found Chance wagging his tail at the door of Donna Estela's apartment as if greeting a longtime friend. The old woman patted Lucas's shoulder. "He's good company, you know. Hard to say no to that face." Lucas smiled, a rare warmth filling his eyes. It was like a fragile, precious miracle. For once, he had something in life that gave him hope beyond the next day's grueling schedule. Caraway Springs woke to an early autumn drizzle, the kind that left the streets slick and the sky in a perpetual state of gray. Lucas, in his usual rush, nearly slipped on the slick tiles outside the apartment building as he prepared for another round of deliveries. Chance was safely ensconced with Donna Estela for the morning, happily nibbling on a better brand of kibble that Lucas had managed to purchase from his meager tips. The old woman no longer pretended she was merely doing Lucas a favor. She would often chat with the dog in a tender voice, calling him a good boy and remarking on how he'd grown livelier. As Lucas zipped through the damp streets, his mind flickered between daydreams of a more stable life for himself and Chance and the grim reality of rent due in 2 weeks. Yet the simple thought of coming home to find that trusting gaze staring up at him often felt like the single bright spot in a life that had long been consumed by worry. And so he pressed on, weaving past trucks and minivans, delivering meals to houses that usually remained invisible to him, people with small dramas and quiet joys, each momentarily glimpsed through half-open doors. Late in the afternoon, while juggling a set of stacked orders, Lucas's phone rang. He balanced the paper slips in one hand and answered with the other, expecting some minor crisis at the dispatch center. Instead, Dr. Hannah's calm voice greeted him. "Lucas, I was wondering if you have some time to bring Chance in for a follow-up exam," she said. "I've got a cancellation on Thursday morning. He was in bad shape when you brought him, and I'd like to see how his leg is healing." Thursday morning was typically a high-volume delivery shift, but Lucas had already promised himself he wouldn't take shortcuts on Chance's care. "I'll be there," he said, ignoring the flare of anxiety about how to rearrange his schedule. He'd just have to talk to Gyro and hope for a sliver of understanding. He finished the call, feeling both determined and uneasy. Determined because he refused to let Chance's recovery slip. Uneasy because Gyro had a bad habit of docking pay for missed shifts. That evening, Lucas braced himself before stepping into the distribution center's cramped office, where Gyro sat hunched over a battered computer. Approaching with the best attempt at confidence, he explained the situation. Chance needed a vet checkup, the appointment was non-negotiable, and he hoped for permission to miss part of the shift. Gyro's bushy eyebrows rose. "A dog?" he repeated, his tone laced with incredulity. "Lucas, we don't run a charity here. If you walk out on Thursday, I'll have to give those hours to someone else. Lucas swallowed, bracing for what that would mean. I understand. Just please let me know if I can make up time on another day. Jairo shrugged, a cynical twist on his lips. We'll see, he said, waving Lucas away. Now get out there. There's a dinner rush coming. His stomach tight with worry, Lucas rushed to his motorcycle. Over the next few hours, he forced himself to focus on the job at hand, but dread lurked at the edges of his mind. He'd never taken days off, never asked for special treatment. And in the end, if he lost a few shifts to take Chance to the vet, he'd just have to handle the consequences. He couldn't imagine telling Dr. Hannah that he'd skipped the follow-up, nor could he stomach letting the dog suffer any relapse. When he finally arrived home near midnight, he was greeted by the sight of Chance dozing in the hallway, curled at Dona Estela's feet. She was humming a lullaby from the old radio, a half-smile on her face. He insisted on waiting for you, she said softly. Lucas gathered the dog into his arms. Chance licked his chin once, a gentle greeting. Thank you, Lucas murmured, feeling yet again that small surge of gratitude. He escorted Chance back into his own apartment, wincing at the chipped paint and flickering light overhead. He longed to give the dog a better environment, but for now, this was all he had. Once inside, Lucas set the dog down and rummaged for the final pouch of dog food. His paycheck wouldn't arrive for another 5 days, and each day felt like an eternity. While Chance ate, Lucas warmed leftover noodles for himself. He tried to keep his mind off the swirling doubts. If he missed Thursday's shift, how would he cover rent? If he let Chance's appointment slide, what kind of caretaker would he be? At some point, exhaustion overwhelmed him, and he let the thoughts fade into the background. He laid out an extra blanket, giving the dog a soft place to rest, then slumped onto his bed, falling asleep almost instantly. Thursday morning arrived faster than he expected. The moment his phone alarm buzzed at dawn, Lucas rushed to get dressed. He had only a small window before the hustle at the distribution center began. He'd already texted Jairo, repeating his request for a partial shift. No reply. Still, he had no choice. He loaded Chance onto the bike and headed straight for the veterinary clinic. Dr. Hannah's assistant recognized them immediately, ushering them into an exam room with minimal wait. Chance, though limping slightly, sniffed the corners with guarded curiosity. Dr. Hannah arrived, offering a warm smile. Let's see how he's healing, she said, guiding Lucas and Chance onto the scale first. After some fussing and coaxing, the dog settled, revealing he'd gained nearly 1 kilogram since the last visit. That's a good sign, Dr. Hannah remarked, scribbling notes. With the right food and care, he'll continue improving. She examined the leg wound next, gently unwrapping the bandage. The cut had closed nicely, though a faint scar remained. No sign of infection, Dr. Hannah declared with satisfaction. He should keep the bandage off now, but you'll want to keep the area clean. With that, she gave Lucas a fresh supply of antibiotics to finish off. Relief flooded him. He sat by the exam table, stroking Chance's fur while Dr. Hannah looked over her notes. He's got a remarkable temperament, especially for a stray, she said. Some dogs remain skittish for months, but he's calm. A real fighter, too. Lucas nodded. He's saved me more times than I've saved him, he mumbled, half smiling. She raised an eyebrow. You mean more than the night you rescued him? He paused, uncertain how to explain that just caring for Chance had given him a sense of purpose. He tried to shape the words and gave up, merely giving the dog a playful scratch behind the ears. Dr. Hannah understood enough from the gesture. After paying the modest fee, now pushing his credit card perilously close to its limit, Lucas led Chance outside into the crisp morning air. The weight of his financial predicament pressed against his temples, but he shook it off, deciding to savor at least a moment of joy. Chance's leg was healing. That meant the dog might soon be able to run without pain, chase after squeaking toys, or simply enjoy a decent life. He checked the time. It was barely 8:30. If he hurried, maybe he could salvage half his shift. He guided Chance back onto the motorcycle, feeling the dog settle against him with trust that still amazed him. They roared down the main road until they reached the distribution center's parking lot. Lucas left Chance safely by a little patch of grass beside the entrance, tethered loosely to a fence. "I won't be long," he promised, patting the dog's head. Then he hurried inside to confront whatever fallout awaited. As expected, Gyro glared. "Where the hell were you?" barked the boss, hands on his hips. Around them, other drivers were grabbing order slips, too busy to linger on the drama. Lucas steeled himself, explaining he'd gone to the vet. "I'm here now. Can I take an afternoon shift?" he asked, forcing calm into his voice. Gyro scoffed, rummaging through a heap of papers. "I already assigned your routes to someone else. There's not enough left for you to earn the full day's wage. Best you can do is 2 or 3 leftover orders." Lucas fought the urge to protest, reminding himself that an argument would only push him further out of favor. He clenched his jaw and nodded, accepting the meager scraps of work. "Fine," he said softly. Gyro grunted, as though to remind him that life was rarely fair. When Lucas stepped back outside, fists clenched, he found Chance waiting patiently. The dog's ears perked at his arrival, tail scraping the pavement in a happy wag. That small display of loyalty softened Lucas's frustrations. "We'll just do what we can, right?" he told the dog, untying the rope and gently guiding him away. He stuck the meager route slips into his pocket, determined to earn at least something, and walked the dog back to the bike. A pang of guilt flickered through him. Bringing a dog on deliveries was unorthodox at best, but he had nowhere else to put him. He began making his rounds. The first address was a small office block near the post office, and the second was a cluster of apartments on the southern edge of town. Usually Lucas would dart from place to place in a hurry, but with Chance in tow, he found himself moving with greater care. He'd park, help the dog onto the sidewalk, and lead him to the doorway. More than a few curious glances came their way, but no one objected. Some even smiled. In fact, one older man receiving a lunch delivery stooped to pat Chance, remarking on how calm and well-behaved he was. By midday, Lucas had finished the last of his assigned orders, a pathetically short list, but it was all he'd managed to keep. He pocketed what little tip he got and debated returning home or heading somewhere else. The memory of the vet fees gnawed at him, but an even bigger concern overshadowed finances. How was he going to keep a dog in that dreary apartment in the long run? Donna Marta would not remain lenient forever, and if money dried up, he might be forced out of the building anyway. In a moment of impulsive determination, he steered the bike toward the outskirts, where realtors sometimes posted cheap studio listings. Maybe he could find a low-rent place that allowed animals, something close enough to his job but safer than the current arrangement. It felt foolish, given his threadbare funds, yet the alternative was giving Chance up to a shelter he doubted would have space for a dog with a history of injury. He arrived at a strip mall containing a couple of real estate agencies, their windows plastered with photos of cheerful homes that existed in some parallel universe of middle-class comfort. The cheapest listing was a tiny basement apartment, still well above what Lucas could comfortably pay. The realtor, a harried woman with a phone pressed to her ear, barely looked at him. "No pets allowed in that one," she said, not unkindly but with finality. "We do have a place on Elm Street that's a bit more flexible. However, the deposit's non-refundable plus 2 months' rent up front." Lucas did some quick mental math and felt his hope deflate. That was out of reach. Leaving the agency empty-handed, he realized Chance was panting beside him, limp more pronounced after the day's exertion. "We'll rest soon, buddy," Lucas said, stroking the dog's back. "We'll figure out something, I promise." Yet even as he reassured Chance, he couldn't quiet the voice in his head that whispered, maybe some problems, had no easy answers. Lucas left the strip mall carrying a new heaviness in his chest, pushing his old motorcycle toward a patch of shade by the curb. Chance followed with slow, uneven steps, his limp more evident after the day's efforts. The dog sat obediently, as if understanding that what Lucas wanted right now was a moment to think. Sighing, Lucas pulled off his helmet and wiped the sweat from his brow. It felt like every path led to another dead end. No landlord would rent to a broke delivery driver with a dog, at least not without a hefty deposit. And he certainly didn't have that kind of money. He stroked Chance's head, letting the dog rest for a moment. "We might be stuck," he murmured, voice tight. Chance only blinked up at him, tail thumping softly against the pavement. The trust in those brown eyes made Lucas's throat tighten. He refused to abandon the dog. Even the thought of relinquishing him to some overburdened shelter felt impossible now. With a resigned breath, he climbed back onto the bike. "Come on, buddy," he said, gesturing for Chance to hop into his usual spot. "We'll try again tomorrow." That night, Caraway Springs was awash in the glow of streetlights flickering through a persistent drizzle. Lucas returned home from delivering his final orders exhausted, his arms trembling from the day's stress. He guided the motorcycle under the building's awning, carefully helping Chance onto the slick steps. But halfway up, they were met by Dona Marta, broom in hand, scowling at the water dripping from Lucas's jacket. "You're tracking in mud," she grumbled, pointing at the small trail of footprints and paw marks. Then her gaze shifted to Chance, with a look of mixed annoyance and sympathy. "How long are you planning to keep this dog?" she asked, her tone sharper than usual. Lucas clenched the handrail, heart pounding. I don't know. He's almost healed," he said, swallowing hard. "Once he's better, maybe I'll find a permanent place for both of us. I promise he won't cause trouble, Dona Marta. I'll clean up any mess." She regarded him in silence, tapping her broom against the banister. He feared the worst, but at last she just shook her head. "Fine," she muttered. "But if I get one more complaint, you're out. I'm running a business here, not a rescue." He managed a mumbled thanks and hurried upstairs with Chance. Before he even unlocked his apartment door, Dona Estela stuck her head out from the next unit. "Don't pay her any mind," the old widow whispered. "She's bark and no bite." Then she vanished, leaving Lucas to wonder if that was strictly true. Inside, he set Chance down, toweled him off, and then crammed his soggy uniform into a plastic bag. He changed into an old t-shirt, noticing the weight of a half-empty wallet pressing on his mind. He rummaged through his phone, scanning for any new leads on dog-friendly rentals in the area. Not a single promising message. Hunger gnawed at him. He gave Chance a scoop of kibble first, then heated a small bowl of instant rice for himself. The taste was plain, but he had no energy for more elaborate cooking. While he ate, Chance drifted to the window, ears perked at the sounds of the rain outside. A flicker of lightning revealed a brief reflection of them both in the glass, two souls, lonely, but not alone. After dinner, Lucas scrolled half-heartedly through online classifieds, fighting the urge to despair. Jobs that offered higher pay required a car, specialized skills, or references he didn't have. Rooms in shared houses wouldn't allow a dog, or they demanded months of upfront rent he couldn't afford. He rubbed his eyes, a dull headache forming. Without realizing it, he dozed off. When he woke with a start, Chance was settled at his feet, muzzle resting across his ankles as though standing guard. The next day proved no easier. Lucas spent his off hours riding through different neighborhoods, scanning for any for-rent signs that might allow animals. But each place was either out of his price range or refused to consider a dog. In desperation, he wandered down side roads full of dilapidated houses, recalling rumors that some owners were willing to rent informally, Eventually, he stumbled upon a narrow building with peeling paint, half hidden behind overgrown hedges. A battered sign read, "Rooms for rent, inquire within." Leading Chance through the broken gate, Lucas knocked. A tall, wiry man with kind eyes answered, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah?" he said, glancing at Lucas and then at Chance. "Need a room?" When Lucas nodded, the man introduced himself as Domingo. "I don't mind dogs," he assured, stepping aside to reveal a cluttered hallway. "I mind destruction, though, so if that dog chews walls or tears up floors, no deal." Lucas's heart leapt with cautious hope. "He's calm," he insisted, wanting to prove it. Chance gazed around curiously, tail waving in polite greeting. The man gestured for them to follow. "I've got a small unit in the back. Rent's cheap, but don't expect luxury." They stepped into a cramped space that smelled of mothballs and old cardboard, maybe half the size of Lucas's current apartment. The paint on the walls was flaking, and the lone window faced a rusted metal fence. Still, it might be a lifeline if the rent was truly affordable. "How much?" Lucas asked, bracing for disappointment. Domingo named a figure that was, astonishingly, within reach, though it left almost no margin for other expenses. 2 months up front, Domingo added, eyes narrowing. "No contract, no fuss. You have it or not. 2 months in advance." That old barrier, rearing its head yet again. Lucas tried not to show his deflation. I don't have that right now," he admitted. "But maybe I can pay you in installments? 1 month now, the second in a couple of weeks?" Domingo shook his head. "Got burned before by tenants skipping out. Sorry, kid, no exceptions." Lucas cast a desperate glance at Chance, who sniffed the corners of the small room as though evaluating if it could be called home. He swallowed, turning back to Domingo. "Could you hold it for me a few days? I'll try to scrape together the money." The landlord shrugged. "If someone else shows up with cash, I won't wait. But if it's still available, come back." They left, Chance trotting beside Lucas with a noticeable limp after so much walking. Outside, the sun had emerged from behind grimy clouds, shining on a tangle of weeds and broken pavement. Lucas paused in the yard. A wave of frustration flooded him. He couldn't conjure extra money from thin air. Maybe he could pick up side jobs. There was talk of a local factory needing part-time labor. Or less appealing, he could ask Dr. Hannah if she knew any fosters for Chance. That last idea twisted his stomach. The dog had become more than a stray he rescued. He was a companion, a living promise that even in a life as gray as Lucas's, kindness could grow. By the time they reached home, the day's heat and disappointment had left both of them drained. Lucas parked the bike and helped Chance up the stairs once more. In the hallway, Dona Marta was handing out mail. She eyed him with her usual suspicion, but said nothing. He entered his unit to find a note slipped under the door. An electric bill. The amount made him wince. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion returning. "I need to figure out something," he said aloud, nearly startling himself with the raw desperation in his voice. At least Chance's leg was healing. The dog moved about the room more freely, occasionally nosing at the corners, as though searching for scraps or hidden smells. Lucas smiled faintly. "You're so much better than you were, huh?" The dog's ears twitched, as if in agreement. "Soon you'll be outrunning me, you know." The next week blurred into a pattern of restless nights and frantic days. Lucas doubled his efforts, working extra shifts whenever Jairo had gaps, scouring online listings, and calling every number pinned on the notice board at the grocery store. A handful of people seemed sympathetic, but nothing materialized that would spare him from paying a large deposit. Meanwhile, bills loomed, and the tension with Dona Marta simmered. Lucas sometimes caught her glaring at him in the corridor, but she said nothing further. In a rare moment of rest, he took Chance to a patch of grass by the local park. A crooked sign by the entrance read, "No unleashed dogs," but the place was deserted on a weekday afternoon, so Lucas decided to take a chance. He let the dog roam a little on the grass. The limp was still present but not so pronounced, and Chance lifted his snout to the breeze, tail wagging softly at the unfamiliar scents. Watching that scene, Lucas found a small measure of joy bubble in his chest. He never realized how satisfying it could be to see another creature healing. Perhaps in some roundabout way, he was healing too. While Chance poked around a clump of fallen leaves, Lucas's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail but picked up at the last second. "Hello?" he answered, bracing for a scam. Instead, a cheery voice said, "Good afternoon. My name is Martina, from Bright Start Animal Aid. I got your number from Dr. Hannah. She mentioned you were looking for help with a rescue dog named Chance." Lucas's pulse quickened. Yes, I am," he replied, his words stumbling in eagerness. In a rush, he explained the situation, that he'd found the dog wounded, had no stable finances, and was under threat of eviction. Martina listened intently. "We can't guarantee immediate placement," she cautioned, "but we run a fostering network. Sometimes we can provide temporary homes for animals in transition. Maybe you could remain involved until you're on your feet?" His chest tightened at the thought of giving up daily care of Chance. But the alternative was precarious. He cleared his throat. I'd like to talk more about it. The idea is that eventually I'd get him back, right? I'm not sure I'm ready to say goodbye forever." She made a sympathetic noise. "We can explore a fostering arrangement where you'd still visit and remain the dog's primary adopter, so to speak. Meanwhile, he'd be in a stable environment that allows dogs. Would that help you get your living situation sorted?" Lucas hesitated. The dog had changed his life, given him purpose in the bleakness. Yet if he couldn't secure a place that allowed pets, forcing Chance to stay in these cramped quarters might end poorly for both. Slowly he responded, "Yes, it might help." They agreed to meet that Friday at a small cafe near the veterinary clinic to discuss details. Hanging up, he looked over at Chance chasing a stray leaf. A sudden pang of guilt tore through him. Was he about to pass the dog off to someone else after all they'd been through? The dog turned, meeting his eyes with that quiet devotion. Lucas sighed, heart heavy. "We'll do whatever keeps you safe, buddy," he whispered. "I'll make it work somehow." He clenched his phone in his hand, a swirl of conflicting emotions buffeting him. Maybe fostering was just a temporary measure. Maybe it would give him the breathing room to earn enough for a place. In the meantime, at least Chance would have a guaranteed roof. He stood there in the fading daylight, the park hushed around him, the dog at his side, and wondered if this was the first step toward losing the one good thing he'd found, or the only way to secure a future for them both. Friday arrived with a crisp clarity in the air, as if the clouds had momentarily parted to grant the people of Caraway Springs a brief reprieve from the usual gray. Lucas woke before dawn, anxious about his meeting with Martina from Bright Start Animal Aid. He got dressed in haste, swallowed a cup of cheap instant coffee, then roused Chance from the cocoon of blankets near the bed. The dog stretched and yawned, seeming content despite the cramped surroundings. They made their way downstairs. Outside, the pale morning light revealed Donna Marta chatting with a neighbor by the mailboxes. Upon spotting Lucas and Chance, she paused mid-sentence. He steeled himself for another reprimand, but she simply raised her eyebrows, as though silently warning him not to test her patience further. With a nod that felt more like a truce than a greeting, he hurried past her, feeling relief that at least she said nothing about them leaving so early. He guided Chance onto his motorcycle, tying him in place the way he had become accustomed to. The dog settled easily, trusting Lucas's balancing act. As they cruised through the streets, Lucas allowed himself a flutter of optimism. If Martina's fostering network could help, maybe there was a chance, no pun intended, that he could secure a stable life for the dog. Yet the thought left a hollow pit in his stomach, as it implied giving up the closeness they had shared each day. Still, it was better than risking eviction or a constant edge of worry. They arrived at the cafe near the veterinary clinic just before 9. The place was modest, with a handful of wooden tables under a green awning. Martina was already seated, wearing a bright yellow sweater that stood out against the cafe's subdued decor. Short, curly hair framed her friendly face. She noticed Lucas instantly, waving him over with a warm smile. He parked the bike, unstrapped Chance, and ushered the dog along to the table. Martina stood to greet them both. "You must be Lucas," she said, extending a hand. "And here's the famous Chance. Dr. Hannah told me how badly injured he was, yet look at him now." The dog sniffed her offered palm, tail wagging in polite greeting. Martina ruffled the fur behind his ears. "He seems so sweet." Lucas exhaled, momentarily relieved by her easygoing manner. He thanked her for arranging the meeting, and they all sat. She slid a menu across the table, but Lucas shook his head. "I'm good," he murmured, aware he had only enough money for bare essentials. Martina ordered a coffee for herself, then opened a folder that lay beside her purse. "Bright Start Animal Aid is a small nonprofit," she explained, flipping through forms. "We rely on volunteers to foster dogs temporarily. The fosters provide shelter, socialization, and basic care, while we assist with medical expenses or special needs. When the dog is stable, we either arrange adoption or reunite them with their original caretaker, if that's the plan." Lucas listened intently, petting Chance, who seemed content to rest at his feet. "So if I choose fostering," he asked, carefully weighing each word, "Chance would live with a family that can provide what I can't right now, like a yard, no risk of eviction, maybe more resources. And I'd be able to visit?" "That's right," Martina confirmed. "We'd register you as the primary adopter in waiting. It's an unusual arrangement, but not unheard of. The fosters would understand from the beginning that they're caring for him on your behalf until you're able to take him back. If for some reason you decide it won't work in the future, we can facilitate a permanent adoption. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." Lucas tried to swallow the lump forming in his throat. He pictured stepping into an apartment or small house, maybe weeks from now, calling for Chance and the dog bounding to greet him. The idea sounded like a promise of a better tomorrow, but it also meant letting Chance go for an indefinite span of time, missing the small daily moments that had become strangely precious. "How soon can this happen?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. Martina studied him with sympathetic understanding. "Well, typically we do a home inspection to ensure the fosters can safely accommodate the animal. That can take a week or two to coordinate. Once that's settled, we'd arrange the handover. Could be as soon as next month." He nodded, glancing down at the dog who, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation, was now focused on a crumb that had fallen near Martina's shoe. "I appreciate you setting all this up," Lucas said quietly. "It's not what I wanted exactly, but I can't risk him ending up on the street if I lose my place. I'd hate myself for that." Martina's expression softened. "I get it. Rescuing an animal is an incredible act of compassion, but the realities of life can make it complicated. Our goal is to reduce those complications so that neither the dog nor the owner has to suffer." Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. "I need to check on something. Back in a moment," she said, rising from the table. Lucas watched her walk away, phone pressed to her ear, leaving him alone with his thoughts. In the distance, cars rolled by, the hum of everyday life oblivious to the quiet crossroads in which he found himself. He gave Chance a gentle scratch behind the ears, heart twisting at the idea that soon he might be saying goodbye for a little while. Martina returned moments later, pocketing her phone. Sorry about that logistics call. She took a sip of her coffee, then handed him a leaflet with instructions. Here's how we proceed if you decide to move forward. First, fill out our intake form with your details and what you know about Chance. We'll schedule a vet check with Dr. Hannah just to confirm he's fully vaccinated and healthy enough for fostering, though it sounds like you've already done most of that. After that, we'll open a listing within our foster network. He stared at the paper, reading words like temporary care and transfer of responsibility. They felt strangely formal, as if he were surrendering more than just a dog. Even so, he took a pen from her, scribbling basic information, ignoring the tightness in his chest. He returned the form, mouth dry. That's that then. Pretty much, Martina said, her voice gentle. I'll keep you updated on potential fosters. Meanwhile, you can call me anytime if something changes. She closed the folder. Just be aware we can't guarantee how fast we'll find someone. Our network is small and lots of dogs need help. Lucas nodded mutely, standing up and extending a hand. He thanked her once more, then they parted ways. He and Chance headed to his motorcycle, forging through a mild midday breeze. As he revved the engine, he cast one last look at the cafe's door, where Martina was still inside, probably making notes about them. The sense of finality scared him. We'll see, Chance, he murmured. Maybe it won't come to that, if I manage to fix our situation soon. He tried to hold on to that slim hope as they returned home. Over the following days, he worked himself ragged. He picked up every possible shift, even offering to cover for colleagues. Tips were modest, but it was something. He tried small, odd jobs after hours, delivering flyers door to door, helping an acquaintance move furniture for a tiny fee. Every extra coin went into a coffee tin in his closet, a hidden trove he hoped would soon be large enough to solve the deposit problem for Domingo's cramped rental. He counted out bills at night, imagining a scene where he marched back to that peeling building and said, "Here, I have it all, let me sign." Chance, meanwhile, grew steadily stronger. The limp became barely noticeable. In a strange twist, Donna Estela actually seemed to enjoy the dog's presence more than ever. During Lucas's long work stint, she taught Chance simple commands: sit, stay, come, rewarding him with gentle praise and a handful of borrowed biscuits. She joked that if Lucas couldn't keep him, she might. But Lucas knew it was just talk. The elderly widow barely managed on her pension, and the building's strict rules would never permit that arrangement. Weeks slipped by with no word from Martina. Lucas alternated between relief and impatience. Every day that the foster arrangement didn't move forward meant he could keep Chance by his side, but it also meant no solution was guaranteed if Donna Marta finally lost patience or if he simply couldn't make rent. While the nights dragged into bleak hours of half-conscious worry, the daylight was spent in a treadmill of deliveries. He sometimes caught a glimpse of himself in store windows, shoulders slumped and eyes shadowed by fatigue, his uniform fraying at the edges. During one late afternoon run, Lucas arrived at a tidy yellow house with a small porch. A silver-haired woman answered, accepting her order with a smile. Before he could turn away, she noticed Chance at his side. "Oh my goodness," she cooed, stepping onto the porch. "What a lovely dog. May I say hi?" Chance wagged his tail, letting her pat his head. She beamed. "You'd take good care of him. He looks like a loyal friend." Something in her warmth unsettled Lucas in a bittersweet way. He swallowed the knot in his throat, thanked her, and jogged back to the bike. As they rode off, a wave of yearning rushed over him. When was the last time someone had spoken so kindly to him? He patted Chance gently. "We'll find a home soon," he said, voice husky with pent-up emotion. "I just wish it was easier." He finished the day's rounds and returned once more to the flickering hallway light of his apartment building. He was exhausted, sure, but not even close to the sum he needed for a deposit. Spreading out his meager earnings on the chipped kitchen table, he counted them again, still far short. Chance sat by, muzzle resting on the table's edge, as though trying to decipher the human world's fixation with money. "I'm trying," Lucas murmured, gathering the bills. "Just keep being patient with me, okay?" Late that night, after the noise of the other tenants died down, Lucas found himself going through old pictures on his phone, a random snapshot of Chance dozing, the dog's tongue lolling out. Another photo from that day in the park when he first got the fostering idea. The dog's bright eyes and trusting face reminded him why he wasn't giving up. A swirl of doubt remained, though. If Martina called tomorrow to say a foster home was ready, would he agree to it, or would he hold out just a bit longer? The answer eluded him as he finally lay down, exhaustion winning over worry. He sank into restless dreams, half-formed images of cramped rooms and barking dogs. Each time he stirred, Chance's soft breathing was there, anchoring him to a fragile sense of purpose. In the silent hours before dawn, he wrapped an arm across the bed's edge, feeling the dog's warm fur beneath his fingertips. The world outside might have been cold and unyielding, but here, for at least a few more nights, they belonged together. Lucas stood at his window early the next morning, gazing down at the street where the first threads of dawn lightened the horizon. Chance lay curled at his feet, dozing after another restless night. The hush of pre-dawn always made Lucas feel both hopeful and apprehensive, as if the entire day's events hovered just out of reach. He carefully checked the small coffee tin on his windowsill, counting each banknote and coin. Though he'd managed to add a little more to his savings, he was still short of what Domingo demanded for the deposit. Time was running out, yet he pushed aside the thought and patted Chance's head. The dog blinked awake, yawned, and nuzzled his hand in greeting. His phone rang just as he was placing a bowl of kibble on the floor for Chance. The number was unfamiliar. Heart pounding, he answered, half expecting Martina with big news about a foster home. Instead, a woman's measured voice introduced herself as the manager of a local warehouse on the edge of town. She had received a referral from an acquaintance who mentioned Lucas was hardworking and might be seeking extra hours. "We have a short-term vacancy," the manager explained. "Night shifts, mostly inventory work. Minimum wage, but if you're interested, you can start next Monday." Surprised and elated, Lucas agreed on the spot, scrawling down the details in an old notebook. For once, opportunity seemed to appear without a labyrinth of conditions, and he vowed not to let it slip away. When Monday arrived, Lucas pulled a nearly round-the-clock routine, deliveries by day, warehouse by night. He gave up any spare hours he once used for rest, returning home only to switch from his stained delivery uniform into a set of dusty overalls for the warehouse. Chance adapted as best he could, spending more time in Donna Estella's apartment. She never complained about looking after him, although Lucas insisted on paying her a small weekly sum. "Don't worry about me," the widow said, brushing away his concerns. "I enjoy the company. Just make sure you don't work yourself into a hospital bed." Despite the punishing schedule, Lucas felt a flicker of optimism with each new wad of tips and each warehouse paycheck. Every stray coin went into the coffee tin, whose weight now offered a faint sense of hope. Sometimes, toward midnight, he'd pause in the middle of an echoing storage aisle and picture a future where he lived in a modest but dog-friendly apartment, Chance running around, no landlord glaring at them both. Those brief moments of reverie carried him through the bone-deep fatigue. After 2 weeks, Martina called again. This time her tone was both apologetic and upbeat. "We may have a foster placement for Chance," she said. "The family is located just outside Caraway Springs. Spacious yard. 2 older children who love dogs. They're willing to care for him until your situation stabilizes." Lucas gripped the phone, relief mingled with dread. He'd made progress saving money, yet not enough to move out immediately. The notion of handing Chance over still caused his chest to clench, But if eviction loomed, maybe it was the safest route. That's great," he managed, forcing a steady tone. They agreed to meet in a few days so he could introduce Chance to the prospective fosters. He spent the intervening time in an anxious fog. The coffee tin was tantalizingly close to being full enough for a deposit, maybe just another month of double shifts, and he'd have all he needed. Could he convince Martina and the new family to wait? Or would that be selfish, leaving Chance in limbo when a comfortable yard awaited him now? Each time he pictured the dog happily bounding across green grass, a knot of jealousy formed in his stomach. He wanted that bond to remain theirs alone, yet he couldn't ignore the reality that real estate wasn't going to bend to sentiment. The day of the Foster family visit arrived quicker than expected. Lucas took a rare afternoon off, walking with Chance to a small park near the center of town. Martina was already there, accompanied by a middle-aged couple and their 2 children, a girl and a boy, both around 10 or 11. The kid's eyes lit up at the sight of Chance. He wagged his tail uncertainly, picking up on the swirl of human excitement. Martina introduced them. The couple was named Ruben and Carla Batista, local business owners with a modest property just beyond the city limits. The children were Lily and Sam, who crouched and extended gentle hands so Chance could sniff them. Lucas observed the dog's reaction carefully, relieved to see Chance leaning forward, tail swishing in curiosity rather than fear. Ruben spoke first, explaining that they had fostered other dogs for a local shelter. They weren't wealthy, but they had a fenced backyard, some spare time, and a love of animals. "We heard about Chance's story," Carla Batista added, her warm eyes meeting Lucas's, "and we think we can help, at least until you get settled." Martina said you'd prefer a short-term foster. Lucas nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in his throat. He knelt beside Chance, rubbing the dog's neck. "He's come a long way," Lucas said, glancing at the scar that still showed faintly on Chance's leg. "I don't want him losing the progress he's made." Carla smiled. "We promise to take good care of him." While Lily and Sam coaxed Chance into a game of tug-of-war with a squeaky rope, Lucas exchanged more details with Ruben: feed schedules, the brand of kibble Chance preferred, the daily antibiotic finishing dose. He also explained that the dog sometimes whined at night if Lucas returned late from work, though usually a gentle touch settled him. The children laughed when Chance won the tug-of-war, trotting around triumphantly. Watching that small moment of innocent joy, Lucas felt both comforted. Chance looked genuinely happy, and a pang of loss. Martina took notes throughout, finally beaming at everyone. "It sounds like a solid match," she declared. "We can arrange the transfer next weekend or even earlier if you'd like, no rush though." Lily cast hopeful glances at her parents, obviously eager to bring Chance home as soon as possible. Lucas's heart hammered. "Next weekend might be best," he said softly. "I just need some time to say goodbye." The family nodded understandingly, and after one last rub of Chance's ears, they headed off. The park felt strangely empty once they left, though the air was full of warm afternoon light. Martina lingered, placing a hand on Lucas's arm. "You're doing the right thing," she said, as if reading his inner battle. He gave a tight nod, not trusting himself to speak. With a final wave, she departed, leaving Lucas alone with Chance. The dog came to his side, gazing up at him with unwavering devotion, oblivious to how drastically their lives might soon change. That night, Lucas worked a warehouse shift that dragged until nearly dawn. His mind drifted, picturing Chance in a suburban yard, Lily and Sam teaching him to fetch or cuddle on a porch swing. He tried to tell himself it was good, safe, stable. Meanwhile, he'd keep chasing tips and overtime, saving every cent. With luck, he'd have enough to move in a month, maybe 2. Then he could reclaim Chance, forging a new, better life. Over and over, he repeated that logic until it almost convinced him. But when he returned home, bleary-eyed, and found Chance half asleep by Dona Estela's door, something inside him ached at the thought of letting go. After a murmured thank you, he escorted the dog into his apartment, kneeling down to scratch behind Chance's ears. "You sure made this place feel less lonely," he said quietly. Chance shifted closer, that small movement conveying infinite trust. Lucas swallowed a lump of emotion. "Let's make our last few days special, okay?" The dog yawned, then laid a gentle paw on Lucas's knee. He took that as agreement. Those last days felt strangely bittersweet. Lucas made an effort to spend every spare minute with Chance, an early walk here, a stolen hour of fetch in a dusty alleyway there. The dog, unaware of the plan, radiated contentment, tail wagging every time Lucas approached. Even Dona Marta seemed less hostile, perhaps sensing the end of their hallway dramas was near. Only the coffee tin reminded Lucas how precarious things remained, as each day's wage inched him closer to the sum he needed. He joked to Chance that if they had just one more month, he could keep him forever, but the time had already been set. Saturday morning, Martina would come, and Chance would leave with the Batista family. The night before that fateful morning, Lucas cooked an actual meal, rice with a bit of chicken he could ill afford. He let Chance nibble on scraps, carefully avoiding bones. Then he sat on the floor, dog at his side, the glow of a single lamp illuminating the tiny apartment. "It's so funny," Lucas mused aloud. "I found you when I was at my lowest, gave you my last meal, remember? But you ended up feeding something in me, gave me hope, or maybe a sense of purpose." Chance blinked, muzzle tilting as though listening intently. The hours ticked by and Lucas hardly slept. He kept looking at the battered alarm clock, measuring how little time remained. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him. When he woke, slivers of sunlight were already crawling across the walls. The day had arrived. Heart pounding, he rose to dress, methodically gathering Chance's collar, medications, and the worn blanket he'd used since the first night. He even wrote out a short note for the Batistas, Chance's routine, likes, and silly quirks. An odd hollowness filled him as he packed it all up. At exactly 9, Martina knocked on the door. She wore a sympathetic smile, eyes flicking to the stuffed bag in Lucas's hands. Chance bounded forward to greet her, tail wagging, but Lucas could see the confusion flicker in the dog's posture. He rarely left the apartment with anyone else. "They're waiting for us at the cafe parking lot," Martina said gently. Lucas nodded, swallowing a surge of regret. They walked downstairs in silence, passing Dona Marta, who gave a curt nod but said nothing. Outside, the sun shone on the nearly empty street. Lucas carefully lifted Chance onto his motorcycle for one last ride together. Martina followed in her small car. With every block, Lucas's mind replayed memories. The first time Chance had hopped onto his bike, the dog's quiet presence on lonely deliveries. Now each street seemed to whisper farewell. Yet in his mind, he clung to the idea that this wasn't permanent. He would gather enough money, move to a dog-friendly place, and bring Chance back. He had to believe that. At the cafe lot, the Batista family waited beside their SUV, Lily and Sam waving excitedly. Chance perked up at the sight of them, drawn by the memory of that playful tug-of-war. Lucas cut the bike's engine and removed his helmet, meeting Carla Batista's gaze. She offered a kind smile. "We're so happy to have him. We'll send you pictures and updates every week, I promise." Lucas nodded, then dismounted, hugging Chance as if memorizing every detail. His scent, the texture of his fur, the comforting weight pressed against his arms. Handing over the leash felt like a betrayal of something sacred. The children fussed over the dog, and Chance's tail began a cautious wag. Lucas somehow forced a smile. "I'll come for you, buddy," he whispered under his breath. It's just for a little while." He wasn't sure if his own heart believed it. Martina placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Then, with a final nod, he stepped back. The Batistas guided Chance gently into their vehicle, and within minutes they were gone, pulling out of the parking lot and merging into traffic as though it were any other day. Lucas stood in the empty parking lot, watching the Batista family's SUV vanish among the swirling traffic. The abrupt silence felt like a physical ache, and for a moment he simply stared at the road where the car had disappeared. Martina lingered, offering him a supportive pat on the shoulder. She offered to drive him home, but he declined, muttering that he needed to finish some errands. Once she left, he turned to his motorcycle, helmet clutched in trembling hands. The city noise surged around him in a distant roar, yet everything felt muted, as if time itself slowed in sympathy. He exhaled, forcing himself to move, to remember that he still had a plan. The coffee tin in his apartment was nearly full, and now, maybe he could focus. He began the bike's engine and steered aimlessly through the streets, letting the city's rhythms dull his mind. Without Chance pressed against him on the seat, every block felt emptier, every corner strangely unfamiliar. At a red light, he caught his reflection in a shop window and grimaced at the hollow look in his eyes. He told himself this separation was only temporary, that soon he would have enough money to secure the new place. The memory of the children's laughter, though, haunted him. Did Chance already feel at ease with them? He pictured the dog nosing around the Batista's yard, sniffing flowers, oblivious to the heartbreak left behind. That thought should have comforted him, but it only deepened his sense of loss. Eventually, Lucas ended up at the outskirts of town, near the cluster of warehouses where he worked the night shift. The midday sun glinted off corrugated metal roofs, and a hot breeze rattled loose siding. He cut the engine and sat still, pondering whether to pass the time with extra hours if his manager allowed it. The more he worked, the sooner he could fill that tin. Maybe in a month or two at most, he would have enough. He pictured stepping into Domingo's dilapidated rental with a wad of cash, surprising the wary landlord. If everything went right, he could reclaim Chance before the dog decided some new family was home. That last thought stung, but he refused to dwell on doubt. As he walked toward the warehouse entrance, the manager recognized him from the night shift and raised an eyebrow. "Could use an extra hand if you want some hours," she said, handing him a clipboard. "We got a shipment in early, nothing fancy, just a lot of boxes to sort." Lucas nodded, mustering a smile. Work was good. Work was a distraction. Soon he was hauling crates and scanning barcodes, the methodical routine keeping his mind from wandering too far into regret. Still, every so often, a pang of memory struck him, and he'd see Chance's face, the way the dog had watched him earnestly in that final moment before stepping into the Batista's car. Hours slipped by, and when Lucas finally emerged from the warehouse, dusk had fallen. He was covered in dust and sweat, but satisfied that today's unexpected shift would bring him a bit closer to his goal. He decided to stop at the grocery store for a cheap dinner. In the produce aisle, as he weighed a few wrinkled apples, he wondered whether to buy some dog treats out of habit. The realization that Chance wasn't waiting for him at home brought a surge of emptiness. He placed the apples back with a shaky breath, reminded himself that this was the plan. Maybe he could visit the Batistas soon. Martina had promised updates. Just as he was checking out, his phone buzzed with a text from her. Standing in line with his meager groceries, Lucas read Martina's message. A single photo, bright and sunny, showed Lily and Sam crouched beside Chance in a backyard of trimmed grass and a few scattered toys. The dog looked relaxed, his ears perked, tail mid-wag. Beneath the picture, Martina had written, "He's doing great. The kids adore him. We'll keep you posted." A wave of relief mingled with raw longing. He typed a quick response, "Thank you," and hit send, feeling torn. He wanted Chance to be happy, but envy gnawed at him. Those children had easy access to the dog's joyful spirit, while Lucas toiled away, chasing after the security to bring him back. He pushed the phone into his pocket, trying to quell his anxiety. That evening, the stillness of his apartment felt oppressive. No gentle paw on his foot, no quiet companionship as he sorted through the day's meager earnings. He stared at the coffee tin, half afraid to count the money inside. Instead, he cleared a corner of the living room, forcibly reminding himself that soon he'd be leaving this place behind. Perhaps he should pack his few belongings. He retrieved an old cardboard box, depositing clothes he rarely wore and random items that had gathered dust. Each time he found something that reminded him of the dog, like the old bandana Chance once wore, his fingers trembled. He laid it gently on top, telling himself that if he kept busy, the ache in his chest would lessen. The days blurred into a punishing cycle of double shifts. Morning deliveries, quick nap, afternoon warehouse work, short rest, then back again. With each paycheck, the coffee tin grew heavier, yet so did his exhaustion. There were moments when he'd pause mid-shift, leaning against a pallet or a door frame, eyes burning from lack of sleep. Still, he forced himself onward, refusing to indulge any self-pity. Whenever Martina sent photos of Chance, he examined them in private, heart fluttering at each sign the dog was thriving. The Batistas allowed him to visit if he wanted, but he couldn't muster the courage yet. Seeing Chance bound happily about with them might break his resolve to stay focused on the plan. Midway through the third week, an unexpected envelope arrived at Lucas's mailbox. An insurance refund he had filed for months ago, which he assumed would never come. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to tip the balance. With trembling hands, he combined it with the coffee tin's contents, counting the total. Relief and disbelief flooded him. He finally had enough for the deposit Domingo demanded. He stuffed the money in an old backpack, heart thudding as he rushed to his motorcycle. He tore through traffic, half convinced that if he didn't hurry, fate would snatch this chance away. In minutes, he stood before Domingo's peeling door, panting as he knocked. Domingo answered, same guarded expression as before. Lucas extended the backpack. I've got the deposit, 2 months just like you said. Is the place still available? The man arched an eyebrow, then led him inside. The unit remained exactly as Lucas remembered, cramped, dim, battered walls. But it was dog-friendly, and it was his best shot. Domingo counted the bills carefully, nodded in satisfaction, and wrote a quick receipt. You can move in any time, he said. Lucas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A surge of elation washed over him. In that claustrophobic space, he pictured Chance exploring each corner, no longer bound by threats of eviction. After so many weeks of grinding labor and heartbreak, here at last was a milestone reached. A quiet thrill pulsed through Lucas as he left Domingo's house, clutching the receipt like a talisman. The deposit was paid, and the tiny, worn-down unit was officially his. Beneath the peeling paint and mothball smell, he could almost sense a spark of possibility. 4 walls he wouldn't have to vacate in terror each time the landlord frowned or a neighbor complained. He hopped onto his motorcycle, the tension in his muscles easing. For the first time in weeks, the city's bustle felt almost welcoming. His first impulse was to ride straight to the Batista home, gather Chance in a triumphant reunion, but a surge of caution made him pause. There was still the matter of physically moving in, arranging at least a rudimentary living space. The place needed cleaning, maybe a bit of patching. He wanted it to feel like a real home before returning for Chance. After all the dog had endured, bringing him to a half-finished, dreary set of rooms didn't feel right. No, best to handle a few details first. He spent the remainder of the afternoon gathering supplies, a mop, bleach, a bundle of rags. It cost more than he liked, but a sense of excitement buoyed him. Then, with uncharacteristic boldness, he asked Gyro for a brief lull in his delivery schedule. "I've got some critical errands," he explained. "I'll be back on the clock tomorrow afternoon." Gyro stared, displeased, but must have recognized that Lucas rarely made such requests. Finally, he shrugged. "Fine, but you'd better not be slacking off. We have a big lunch rush tomorrow." By early evening, Lucas stood in his new unit, armed with cleaning gear. The flickering overhead bulb illuminated cobwebs in each corner. The floor bore old scuff marks and the windows were smudged as if untouched for years. Yet to Lucas, the emptiness promised a fresh start. He rolled up his sleeves, turned on a battered radio he'd salvaged, and got to work. He scrubbed until sweat trickled down his temples, the musty smell giving way to a faint citrus tang of disinfectant. He taped over minor cracks in the walls, rinsed the grime from the single window that overlooked a narrow alley. Tiny improvements, but each small step felt monumental. By the time he finished, the night air had cooled, drifting in through the half-open window. He sank onto the floor, exhausted, the radio now playing a soft tune beneath static. A wave of longing surged through him. He pictured Chance curled beside him, the comforting warmth of the dog's companionship dispelling the room's lingering chill. "Tomorrow," he whispered to no one, letting the word hang in the silent space. Tomorrow he'd call Martina, ask how soon he could see Chance, tell her he finally had a place to bring him home. The corners of his mouth lifted in a tired smile. For the first time in weeks, he slept in that new unit, sprawled on a rolled-up blanket as makeshift bedding, dreaming of open doors and wagging tails. Morning arrived with a hint of sunshine through the newly cleaned window. Lucas jolted awake, momentarily disoriented, then remembered with a surge of relief. This was his place now. He checked his phone, enough time to rush to the old apartment, gather some essentials, and still make it to the distribution center by midday. He rose, wincing at stiff muscles. He'd have to keep working relentlessly. Rent wouldn't pay itself, but at least he was on firmer ground. He locked the unit with the old skeleton key Domingo had given him, then headed across town. At the building he was leaving behind, Dona Marta was scolding someone in the lobby, but Lucas slipped past quickly, eager to avoid confrontation. He climbed the stairs two at a time. Inside his soon-to-be vacated apartment, he shoved clothes, dishes, and leftover food into boxes. In a corner, he discovered the dog bowl and a soft chew toy, a reminder of the weeks with Chance. He placed them carefully in a separate carton, imagining the dog's delight at seeing familiar items in the new place. He didn't have time to move everything at once, so he loaded what he could onto the motorcycle in haphazard bundles, one large box bungee-corded to the seat, his backpack stuffed with smaller items. It looked absurd, but he was too thrilled to care. He'd do multiple trips if needed. As he carried the first load down, he passed Dona Estela in the hallway. She eyed his teetering boxes with a concerned frown. "You leaving for good, dear?" she asked softly. He paused. "I finally found a place that allows dogs," he said, voice catching. "I've saved enough for a deposit. Gonna make it official once I haul my stuff over. Then I plan to bring Chance back." The old widow's face lit up. "Oh, Lucas, I'm so happy for you. You worked so hard." He nodded, emotion choking him briefly. She pressed a small bag into his hand. "Some rolls and sandwiches. You'll be too busy to cook, I'm sure." Her kindness made his eyes burn with gratitude. After securing his load, he carefully drove across town, dropping the boxes in his new unit. He repeated this twice before he had to rush to the distribution center for his midday shift. He worked the lunch rush without pause, weaving in and out of traffic with the same focus that had earned him minimal but steady tips for months. When the shift ended, he went straight to the warehouse, logging another block of hours. By the time he returned to his newly claimed place, it was nearly midnight. Collapsing onto the floor, he reminded himself that each passing day brought him closer to reuniting with Chance. He just needed to wrap up the move, ensure all was stable, then contact Martina. The next day, after delivering orders in a frenzy, he took the final load from his old room. It was strange to see the once cramped space empty, the walls stained where furniture had stood. A swirl of memories tugged at him. That first night he carried Chance up these stairs, the hush of early mornings spent sharing meager food. He exhaled, half expecting the dog to materialize at his side, but the floor remained bare. "Goodbye," he whispered, stepping out for the last time. He left the key on the table, as requested by Dona Marta, and walked away with a sense of finality. Back at the new unit, he unpacked haltingly. He had no bed frame yet, just a second-hand mattress someone at the warehouse sold him cheaply. A single lamp, a small table for his phone, and boxes that would serve as storage for now. It was Spartan, but it felt like a palace for the sense of freedom it granted. At last he had a place not threatened by a frowning landlady or restrictive rules. A place that belonged to him, and soon enough to Chance. That evening, he called Martina. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the phone to his ear. He hoped there would be no complications with retrieving the dog from the Batistas. She answered on the second ring, her tone bright. "Hey, Lucas, how's life in the new place?" He told her how he'd scraped together the deposit, how he'd moved in, how he'd spent hours cleaning and patching. "I'm ready for Chance," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If the Batistas are willing to let him go." Martina chuckled. "They knew from the start it was a temporary foster, but I should warn you, they've grown pretty fond of him, especially the children. They'll be sad to see him leave. Are you sure you're ready to care for him full-time now? Money okay?" Her concern was genuine, and he appreciated that. "I'll manage," he replied firmly. "I've got a second job. It's rough but stable. This place might be small, but it's ours." A surge of protective pride welled in him. She hesitated. "All right, I'll set up a call with Carla Batista. We'll coordinate a day for you to come pick him up, maybe Sunday?" Lucas nodded eagerly, forgetting she couldn't see him. "Sunday is perfect," he said, heart pounding in gratitude. Before hanging up, he added, "Tell them I appreciate everything they did for him. I really do." Martina promised to convey the message. Once the call ended, Lucas sank onto his mattress, burying his face in his hands as a wave of relief coursed through him. Sunday was only a few days away. Soon Chance would be here, investigating every corner, curling up with him at night. The days before Sunday felt electric with anticipation. Lucas juggled the usual demands of 2 jobs, but now a quiet excitement thrummed in his veins. He bought a new dog bed with part of his tip money, placed it in a corner by the window so Chance could see the alley. He even picked up a small rubber ball from the discount bin, imagining them playing fetch in whatever open lot he could find. Each night, he collapsed from exhaustion, but with a mind abuzz with images of the dog's return. Finally, Sunday arrived. Lucas woke early, nerves frayed and adrenaline pumping. He cleaned the floor once more, double-checked the meager furniture, made sure water and kibble bowls were in place. Then he hopped on his motorcycle, a gentle wind brushing his face as he headed to the cafe parking lot where they'd agreed to meet. On the ride, he caught himself smiling for no reason other than the knowledge that soon Chance would press that familiar muzzle against his shoulder, tail wagging in delight. He was first to arrive, so he stood near his bike, scanning each passing car. His pulse quickened every time headlights appeared. Minutes stretched, the midday sun warming the pavement. Then, at last, an SUV he recognized rumbled into the lot. The Batista family emerged, Ruben, Carla, Lily, and Sam. And from the back seat, Chance hopped out, tail a blur of excitement the moment he spotted Lucas. All the tension in Lucas's chest released in a rush. He strode forward, meeting the dog halfway. Chance sprang against him, front paws dancing, muzzle pressed into Lucas's chest. Laughter and tears mingled as Lucas embraced him. Carla and Reuben exchanged smiles, while Lily and Sam waved in fond farewell. "We're gonna miss him," Lily said quietly, patting Chance once more on the flank. Sam nodded. "He's a good dog," the boy added, biting his lip. Carla approached, handing Lucas a small bag of Chance's toys and leftover food. "He's been truly wonderful," she said. "We're happy we could help. If you ever need us to watch him again, just let us know." Lucas thanked them profusely, eyes brimming. Chance weaved between them as if trying to offer each person a moment of farewell. Then Lily called gently, "Bye, buddy," and the dog nuzzled her hand in response. The family piled back into their SUV, giving a final wave. Lucas and Chance stood side by side, watching them go in a swirl of conflicting emotions: gratitude, relief, and the faint pang of leaving behind the new friends who had cared so lovingly for his dog. Once they were gone, Lucas took a trembling breath. Chance gazed up at him, ears perked, as if awaiting the next command. "We're going home," Lucas murmured, a proud warmth blooming in his chest. It felt so good to say that word now. Home. He strapped the dog into the makeshift harness on his motorcycle, patting him gently. "You'll like it," he promised. Then they sped off, weaving through Sunday traffic, forging a path back to the tiny unit that now felt like a place of new beginnings. As Lucas guided Chance through the narrow doorway of his new home, a gentle excitement flickered in his chest. The dog sniffed the threshold, pausing briefly as if assessing the change in atmosphere. Then, with a small wag of his tail, Chance trotted forward into the tiny unit, nails clicking on the recently scrubbed floor. Lucas set down the borrowed blanket and kibble bag, the meager possessions he had for his companion. The place was humble, peeling wallpaper, a single window overlooking an alley, but it was theirs, free of lurking threats or looming evictions. Watching Chance begin to wander, Lucas felt a knot of gratitude tighten in his throat. He gave the dog a moment to investigate, letting him circle the corners, nose pressed to the baseboards. While Chance busied himself with the new scents, Lucas walked over to the dog bed he had placed near the window. It was a modest cushion bought with the tips of extra shifts, but he hoped it would bring comfort. "Here, buddy," he said, patting it gently. Chance ambled over, sniffing a couple of times, and lay down with a soft huff. Lucas laughed under his breath, relieved to see the dog settling so easily. It felt surreal to finally have a space where they could be together without fear of being sent away. That first evening became a quiet celebration. Lucas boiled a small pot of rice and opened a can of beans. It was hardly a feast, but it was warm food, and he sliced off a portion of leftover chicken for Chance's meal. They ate side by side, man and dog, as the final streaks of sunlight vanished beyond the grimy glass. Lucas had no table or proper chairs, so he sat cross-legged on the floor, occasionally reaching out to scratch behind Chance's ears. The dog's eyes shone with contentment in the dim lamplight. When they finished, Lucas rinsed the dishes in the cramped sink, humming a tune he'd once heard on a late-night radio. The oppressive tension that had haunted him for so long seemed to have lifted, replaced by the soft hush of possibility. At bedtime, he tossed a thin blanket onto the mattress he'd dragged from his old place. Chance promptly hopped up, sniffed the blankets, then curled in a tight circle at Lucas's feet. Though there was a dog bed in the corner, the dog seemed to prefer being close to him, a habit they'd formed in those precarious weeks at the old apartment. Tired from work and the emotional weight of the day, Lucas sank back, letting relief flood him. He had no illusions that life would be magically easy now. Money was still tight, bills would keep coming, but at least he wouldn't have to choose between a roof and his companion. As Chance let out a contented sigh, Lucas whispered, "We made it." He was asleep before he could hear if the dog replied with one of his soft huffs. Morning arrived with a stray beam of sunlight that slipped past the alley's cluttered walls to rest on Lucas's face. He stirred, blinking in disorientation, then remembered where he was. A rush of cautious joy filled him. Chance, already awake, lifted his head the moment Lucas moved. The dog stretched, wagging his tail with a single thump-thump against the mattress, and Lucas reached out to give him a pat. He noticed the scar on the dog's leg, a faded reminder of the night they first met. "You've come so far," he murmured, pulling himself upright. He had just enough time to feed Chance, toss water on his hair, and dash to work. Over the next week, they settled into a routine. Lucas continued juggling deliveries and warehouse shifts, but returning home to find Chance waiting in the tiny apartment eased the strain of long hours. Some nights, when he was sure no one would mind, he took the dog for short walks around the block, letting him explore patches of weeds or sniff parked cars. Chance trotted eagerly by his side, acting as if even the dingiest street was a grand adventure. Occasionally, neighbors watched them with curiosity. A few times, kids approached to ask if they could pet the dog. Lucas let them, feeling a small glow of pride whenever someone remarked on Chance's gentle manner or shining coat. One afternoon, he decided it was time to introduce Chance to a slightly bigger world. They headed to a modest park near the industrial district, a place with a worn swing set and a stretch of patchy grass. After checking that it wasn't crowded, Lucas tossed the rubber ball he had bought. Chance dashed after it, ears flopping, returning triumphantly to drop it at his feet. Though the space was unremarkable, the dog bounded across it as though it were a paradise, each leap proclaiming an unspoken delight at his newfound freedom. Lucas laughed aloud, unable to contain the surge of happiness. "I can't believe I almost lost you," he whispered under his breath, half dreading how close he had come to letting the dog slip away. But now the battered unit with its single window was a safe haven they shared. Amid this tentative calm, life continued to throw its tests. At the warehouse, the manager hinted that the short-term contract might end soon. "We might not need extra hands next month," she warned. Lucas tried to hide his panic. He needed those extra wages to stay afloat. If he lost the night job, he'd be back to scraping by on tips alone. The fear gnawed at him, but each time he walked into his apartment and saw Chance's tail wag, he reminded himself that they had weathered worse. A few uncertain nights seemed a small price for having a stable place for the dog. Then, one evening, he received a call from Jairo. Instead of demanding more shifts, his boss sounded almost apologetic. "Business is slow," Jairo said. "I'll be cutting back hours for a while." Lucas gripped the phone, a tremor passing through him. He could sense the precarious nature of all he'd built. Still, he thanked Jairo, trying not to betray the wave of dread rising inside. After hanging up, he sank onto the mattress, burying his face in his hands. Chance ambled over, pressing a muzzle into Lucas's leg in silent concern. That simple gesture steadied him. "We'll get through this," he whispered, patting the dog's flank. "We always do." Despite the looming uncertainty, new moments of quiet joy peppered his days. Dr. Hannah, learning that Lucas and Chance had a place, paid them a surprise visit one weekend morning. She stood in the tiny living room admiring the dog's bright eyes and improved posture. "He looks terrific," she said, kneeling to run her hand along Chance's back. "All the weight he lost is back, and that limp is barely noticeable. You did a good job, Lucas." He flushed with pride as she gently teased him about how many nights he must have stayed awake to care for the dog. In that moment, the apartment felt almost full of light, as if the darkness of the last few months had receded. Even Martina dropped by for a quick check-in, bringing a small bag of quality kibble and a note from the Batista children, who missed Chance. The note read, "Dear Chance, we love you. Please visit soon." There was a doodle of the dog with a wagging tail. Lucas smiled fondly, letting Chance sniff the paper. The dog's ears perked, as though remembering the children's voices. Martina gave Lucas a gentle nudge. "You can take him for a visit sometime," she offered. "He'll never stop being part of their family in a small way." Lucas nodded, touched by the generosity. Deep down, he knew Chance would always have a place in their hearts too. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas discovered a surprising side to himself, a knack for small improvements. He patched a hole in the wall with leftover plaster, then painted it using a mismatched can of pale blue he found at a discount store. The color didn't match the rest of the walls, but it made one corner cheerful. He acquired an old rug from a neighbor and laid it near the window, creating a cozy spot. Chance often dozed there in a warm patch of midday sun, the dog's peaceful slumber reminding Lucas that despite the challenges, life could hold pockets of solace. One crisp morning, Lucas took Chance on a longer ride out to the rolling farmland near the town's perimeter. They stopped by a quiet stretch of open field where tall grass swayed under a bright sky. No fences, no heavy traffic, just a wind-swept horizon. The dog raced through the grass, occasionally glancing back to ensure Lucas was still nearby. Standing there, feeling the breeze tug at his jacket, Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Memories of endless deliveries and anxious nights flickered through his mind. Yet here, with the sun on their faces, he and Chance seemed to have outrun those ghosts. He called the dog back, and Chance barreled toward him, tongue lolling with joyful abandon. Lucas knelt to hug him, overwhelmed by gratitude for how far they had come. That evening, returning to the apartment, Lucas found an envelope slipped under his door. His heart raced, thinking it might be a late bill or a final notice. Instead, it bore a letter from the warehouse manager. They had decided to extend his short-term contract another month, praising his work ethic. Relief flooded him, followed by a surge of confidence. Maybe he could keep juggling both jobs just a while longer, enough to stabilize. With a grin, he turned to Chance, who waited expectantly by his side. "We've got more time," he said. "Maybe enough for me to buy a table so we're not always eating on the floor." The quiet nights became less heavy, the days less rushed. Sure, the future still loomed with possibilities of new pitfalls, the cost of living, the fragility of part-time work. But for now, Lucas had learned to take each day as it came. Often he recalled how he once gave Chance his last bit of food on a stormy night, and how in return the dog gave him a new sense of purpose. Their bond felt like a beacon in a life that had always seemed one misstep from disaster. One late afternoon, as he sipped a mug of watery coffee and watched Chance doze on the worn rug, he felt a tug of wonder. In the hush of that moment, he realized his life was still far from perfect, but it no longer felt hopeless. If every day meant a new struggle, it also meant a new chance for small triumphs, for wagging tails, for bowls of shared leftovers, for a bright patch of paint on an otherwise dreary wall. He reached down and ruffled Chance's ears. The dog blinked, then flopped onto his back, inviting a belly rub. Lucas obliged with a chuckle. "We're a team," he said softly. Outside, the murmur of city life went on, unaware of how a single stray dog and a humble delivery driver had rescued each other against all odds. And though the road ahead might hold twists he couldn't foresee, Lucas no longer feared the darkness. He had found a loyal friend, a reason to believe, and a home, even if small, that he shared with the one who first taught him how hope could spark from the lowest moment. Together, they were ready for whatever tomorrow brought.